Hello, everyone. I'm Jeff Orzak from Constep. Welcome to the first session of the Advanced Manufacturing track. On behalf of myself and Eric Brown from the Connecticut Business and Industry Association, we hope you have a good session. I'd like to introduce Eric Fogelman, who will be our moderator for today and lead us through our conversation.
All right, thank you, Jeff. As Jeff mentioned, my name is Eric Fogelman. I'm also with Constep. I'm a technology solutions consultant. Our job is to go out and help small manufacturers in the state. We're part of a national network that is charged to go out and focus on those small manufacturers and help grow that community. So I'm excited today. We have a wonderful panel of people to talk about ecosystems for manufacturing entrepreneurship. I'll let each of them give a quick introduction here. First, Lila Partridge with Stanley Techstars.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me here. My name is Lila Partridge, and I'm the Managing Director of the Techstars Accelerator. We work in partnership with Stanley Black & Decker. The Stanley Techstars Accelerator focuses on AI and advanced manufacturing. And we work with companies all over the globe, but are focused here in Hartford, and very excited to be here and talk more about how to develop a manufacturing ecosystem for startups.
All right, thank you. Next, Adam Rodriguez with Forge.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me, guys. My name is Adam Rodriguez. I'm the Director of Regional Initiatives for Forge. We are the nonprofit sister organization of Greentown Labs in Somerville, the North America's largest clean technology incubator. And we're on a mission to help startups navigate the journey from physical prototype to commercialization and impact at scale. Our headquarters is in Somerville at Greentown, and I manage our spoke office out here in Western Massachusetts. And we work with any startup that has a physical prototype and try to make those connections to the regional supply chain.
All right. All right. Last but not least, we have Saul Lustgarten with Tulip.
Hi, everyone. Good being here as well. My name is Saul. I lead product management at Tulip. Tulip is a startup based in Somerville. We have a manufacturing app platform that lets manufacturers digitize their operations by building IoT-enabled apps. And the key there is that they don't need to know how to code. So it's a no-code platform. So anyone can turn their operations into digital processes using our platform. And as part of my role at Tulip, I also lead our community efforts, which include the Advanced Manufacturing Hub. So the New England Advanced Manufacturing Hub specifically, which we launched in partnership with Stanley Black & Decker. And this hub is part of a global network of hubs out of the World Economic Forum.
All right, thank you, everybody. So to kind of get things started here, first question that we wanted to kind of discuss, want to get an idea of what each of you see are some of the biggest challenges for manufacturing startups today. So we'll start with Adam.
Sorry about that, I had to get off mute. Yeah, it's a good question, Eric. You know, one of the things that we see, well, first we'll start with saying that the average hardware startup has about a 5 to 10% success rate. And that's because they face unique challenges that software startups don't. They have physical products, so it can take years to develop these products, which can eat up a lot of upfront capital when you're talking about things like design for manufacturing, material selection, testing. And one of the challenges that we're seeing is that a lot of the hardware prototypes are over-designed. So they might hand over files to a contract manufacturer after eating up a lot of upfront capital, only to find out that the design can't be scaled. Sometimes tolerances are too high, material selection can be not the most optimal for cost. So at Forge, what we do is we connect with startups at an earlier stage and assess their true needs. And then what we're able to do is connect them with our network of design for manufacturing experts to help them scale that product and actually bring it to market. So we identified a regional supply chain of contract manufacturers, design firms that are all willing to work with these earlier stage startups and help them on that design for manufacturing. And because of this, we have 270 startups in our network, and 85% of them are still in operation today.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, I definitely see that. I've spent some time with startups myself, throughout my career. And that was always one of the struggles is as you launch into it, you kind of have that intellectual property in a very narrow area. And all of a sudden you have to start, especially in a startup scenario, because everybody's wearing multiple hats, trying to find people who have the right expertise, trying to learn things yourself, as opposed to having a deeper team to draw from. So having that network around it is, I can see how that's, very valuable and helpful.
I'm going to jump in as an investor too, because I think it's all very related. And Forge obviously does a great job. Techstars is very close and works with you guys as well. I think there's a couple of things. One is not only just the development of the product and being able to manufacture it. There's one thing with manufacturing one, and there's another to manufacture a million. And so this notion of design for manufacturability, it cannot be understated. And within that is also an entire supply chain and other pieces that go into it. Very often a failure in one of them, a single source or something like that can also cause all sorts of challenges. And it is this physical world interaction, which makes it very hard for investors to actually manage risk. And so what ends up happening is that you have this valley of death in most startups. When they first start up, you haven't really proven anything, you haven't really built anything. No one really knows exactly if you can do it. There's a whole host of things that investors look for that are just made even more challenging when there's a piece of hardware that you're building with suppliers, and then you have to intersect with the market at the right time with the right price point. And maybe you're building something that's part of a bigger system and you have to then make sure you take into account their design cycles. I mean, it gets complicated very, very, very quickly. And I would even say that what's really interesting, because I've been on the investment side since, I don't want to say how long, but a long time, all sorts of things have happened to reduce the cost of a startup in the software world. You can buy AWS servers when you need them. Your laptop is incredibly powerful today. And, you would have had to have, a much bigger machine, 10 years ago even. And you've got open source where you don't have to actually build every single piece, which again is one of those things that also ends up having to happen in hardware. So a lot of times, one of the things I talk about when I talk to startups is to say, we really want a proof of concept. And don't expect that the first thing you build, and work with Forge and others is going to be what you ultimately actually bring to market. Make it ugly. Go take off the shelf pieces, cobble them together, make sure the darn thing works. It can look really ugly with wires coming out of it and all that. But if you put it someplace where somebody can play with it and use it and they say, hey, this really helps, then you can go back and design for manufacturability. Then you can go back and do the higher volume redesign, but you want to learn. And so the only thing that I would say to any startup is engage with the market. So not just talk to the customers ahead of time to find whether you need something, but at the same time, let's build a little something that kind of proof of concept, test it, go back, try it a little better. So it's an iterative process. And one of the things that I see often, and I was in Intel for many, many years. I love hardware. Hardware guys like to kind of go in their box in their little room and build something and then come out and say, see what I built? You have to engage, talk to your customers, talk to your people who might be buying first, build a little bit, tell them what you think about it, have them play with it, touch it. I mean, there's some real wonderful aspects of being in the physical world that people can touch it and play with it. And so I would really, engagement and conversation and market is so important.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a good point because, and I speak for myself here as an engineer by training. We do have that tendency to sort of shoot for the stars and we want this thing, it's our baby. We want this thing to be perfect.
Like perfect babies, right?
Right. And so there's always that balance of how do we get the thing that's, that's built the way we want it built, that does what we want it to do, but it actually meets a need out in the real world. Because ultimately, there are only so many projects I can build out of my own pocket before I'm out of money. So somebody's got to be willing to buy it. Yeah, it's an excellent point.
And just to sort of add up to that, Eric, I really think it's that dialogue, right? Any entrepreneur, nobody does it by themselves. And yet people are often very scared to reach out and ask questions. And, if there's any takeaway I'd say to anyone in this hardware community who's thinking about starting a company, talk to people, engage with people. Here you've got some amazing experts on this panel. reach out and ask them a question.
Right.
So,
Not only that, Lila, and you make some really, really awesome points there, but in New England, I mean, we have thousands of manufacturers who have that experience, who have brought several products to market, and they're all willing to kind of engage with that industry 4.0 and innovation, and are looking for the opportunities of tomorrow. So like to your point, reach out, engage with some of these partners and see if they can work collaboratively with you, because in the end, you're going to thank yourself that you did.
Right. So Saul, I'll let you chime in here too. I can see you chomping at the bit there. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I agree with everything Lila and I have been saying. I think hardware is definitely hard. I can speak of it as from the perspective of a startup that, we build, we have a platform, it's software based, but we also make our own hardware, and it's definitely challenging. It's definitely different challenges than building software. I think what Layla was mentioning on talking to people and actually, making sure you're solving a real pain point, it's entrepreneurship 101 that can't be stressed enough. But both Adam and Layla were talking about new ways in which, there's ways to reduce the risk for yourself as you're building this. So just as AWS, for example, or cloud in general can reduce your cost of startup, there's other tools and new technologies that can help you also go through this process, more easily, right? Like things from, tools to manage your bill of materials to help you reduce inventory, to tools like, additive that can help you prototype faster, to tools like, I'll do a shameless plug here, but even Tulip, we use Tulip to build our own hardware, and it really makes it easier for us to go through the assembly process and create the instructions for that, make sure we have quality, and and we certainly see a lot of people using all the tools I mentioned before. Honestly, we have clients that are large companies like Stanley Black & Decker, but we also have small startups. We have a robotics company in Pittsburgh that is leveraging all these technologies to go to market faster. We have a CBD oil manufacturer in Colorado that's leveraging all of this technologies to reduce the cost of building a physical world product. So I would encourage you to do all of that. If we want to talk about selling, the challenges of selling to manufacturing in particular, I don't know if you want to cover that as well, but that's how I kind of understood the question initially. I think there's a lot of challenges there, and I'm happy to talk about those as well if that's useful. But you'll have I think the main thing for me is that it's a challenging decision-making unit, right? It's very complex. So you have your end user is different than your economic decision maker, and that's different from your veto person. So it's a very complex decision-making unit, and navigating that I think can be very challenging at first. So that's definitely a challenge we've learned to deal with over the years. And I think there's other things that are more due to like the stage where the industry is at in terms of new technology. So the industry is still used to buying technologies kind of in the old way, more traditional way. A lot of people still evaluate new technologies as capital expenditure instead of an operation expenditure. So they're used to business models that are more like perpetual license instead of a software as a service, which as a startup might be what you're looking to do, right? So that's definitely a challenge. And I guess, manufacturing can be risk averse with good reasons, right? You can't put a new tech in your shop floor if you're not 100% sure that it's gonna, hold, because otherwise you'll be losing, millions of dollars. So those are all things, you should be aware of as you're going through and be ready to, to tackle.
Yeah. Eric, I have to keep talking. I want to add to that. I think that Saul makes a great point with regard to complexity. And so going back to kind of words of advice for people who are first-time entrepreneurs, the most important thing you can do is surround yourselves with mentors. And these are people who have expertise you don't have. So, Saul talks about all the different tools you can get out there. Well, find someone who knows how to use those tools and to advise you which ones work best and under what circumstances you use one or the other. Forge obviously has an opportunity to help you really get plugged into people who are manufacturing and thinking about design issues. Find somebody at Forge and don't be shy to ask them, would you mind if I mentor? And you go and you get information, and you go off and think about it, you come back and ask for another iteration. Most people are really, really delighted to help as much as possible. And that kind of brings me out to the MFG site that you're putting together, Saul, because I think that's the other place to sort of look for help, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. I put it in the chat. So MFG Works is part of this initiative, the Advanced Manufacturing Hub that I mentioned. So we launched this in conjunction with World Economic Forum. We're trying to create there. This is, by the way, non-related with Tulip. This is more of a public service project that we have. We're trying to build a place where people in manufacturing can come together, an online community where we can go ask questions, answer questions, connect with other people, find relevant jobs, and find resources to learn different skills you might need to advance your career in manufacturing. So thanks, Leila, for reminding me to plug that in, but I encourage everyone to check it out. And I'm happy to talk more about that during Q&A as well.
All right. Yeah, so kind of, expanding on that some more. I think that's definitely a challenge. And I look back at sort of, the college days, you're going through, an engineering program or whatever you're going through, and you're kind of in a little bit of a competitive mode against each other, especially US education, there's a lot of that. And then there's kind of that shift, when you get out into the world and you start to realize that, while there is competition between different companies, if you have competing products, obviously there's the secret sauce that you have to hang on to. But I've always noticed that that's one of those things that people get surprised about, is how willing people are in the community to share ideas with each other and, talk about, what struggles are you facing? And, oh yeah, when I went down that before, this is what we did. And we're always willing to help out. And I think that's, especially critical as you all have talked about that, as from a hardware sense, when you're manufacturing a product, there are a lot of things that get very costly to, when you make mistakes, or if you go down a wrong path, it can be very costly. So just kind of, expanding on that idea, that idea of like the manufacturing hub, what are some other resources that you can look to kind of help get some of that insight and guidance? Adam, I'll let you chime in there.
Sure. I mean, well, a good starting point for us was actually working with Mass MEP and the NIST family. So, Constep, Polaris, they have an understanding of innovation and manufacturing. So with Forge, that was one of the first places that we turned to identify the experts that can help out when you're trying to bring a product to market. And from there, it's really, for us, it's been a boots on the ground approach, and really just getting out there and trying to find who are these suppliers that are willing to engage with innovators, and who are the startups that are looking to have things made, and trying to curate those connections. And through that, you'd be surprised to find out, there's a lot of mom and pop contract manufacturers that are eager to connect with these innovators, but really might not have the time to make it out to Boston or the capacity to do that. So, how do we do that for them? And so by working with places like the NIST family, we were able to identify some of those players and then make those connections.
Right. Excellent. And Lila, I'd love to hear your perspective on that as well. Getting some of that knowledge from people who have experienced things, and as the insurance commercial says, we know a thing or two because we've seen a thing or two. What are you seeing as far as especially larger companies kind of helping out the community as well?
Sure. So I would say that one of the things I work with Stanley Black & Decker is a speaker series, and I'm happy to put the link to that as well in the chat. And what we're doing is actually based off Mark Maybury, who's the Chief Technology Officer of Stanley Black & Decker, working with Sudhi Bangalore, who's the CTO in charge of the operations, really the Industry 4.0 group. We're putting together executives who talk about different aspects of technology, particularly, manufacturing technologies, and what the goal of these panels, monthly panels, speaker panels, are really to give, to quantify, identify, challenge the startup community with solutions that the big global manufacturing companies need. And so we did one on digital twin, October 5th, October 28th, I believe, we're going to have one on supply chain. And generally speaking, that kind of gives you that broad overview of a big company selling to the startup community. These are the areas of interest. And what's really helpful with that kind of a directive is that these companies see everything, right? They're in the market. They're, 120 factories all over the world. They have suppliers. They sell $15 billion worth of product. So they just know what's happening in the marketplace in a way a startup can't possibly. And so that bridging is really important. We do it obviously as part of the accelerator. And the interesting reason I think that Stanley chooses the Techstars Accelerator network to actually run their accelerator is because they want to tap into our network. So our network is incredibly strong in the startup community. We have feet on the ground, we have 50 accelerators worldwide, peers like myself in all different industries and verticals. And then we do a lot of startup events all over the world as well, kind of startup weekends like this and startup weeks. And so the result is that we have an enormous network in the startup community. And so they bridge towards that, and we bridge the startups towards the larger companies. But I want to pause a little bit and talk outside of what Techstars and Stanley does about just the general process. When I think of manufacturing, I kind of see two paths that come to hardware. One is out of the universities, where there's some really hardcore, hard science being done, often years and years before it even gets to a product. And so how does that get out? And I want to talk about that. And the second one is a bunch of engineers who are in the real world, like the guys here, who come up with an idea and say, hey, we can build this and do something better. And in the case of the academia, what I see often happening is you have a PhD student working for a professor. They get to a certain point, they realize there's something here. Often they work with a technology transfer office to do the right patenting. They're not quite ready to talk to someone like me. They're not quite ready yet to talk to someone like Stanley. You go into a pre-accelerator, and a lot of universities like Columbia and University of Toronto, they have these programs that sort of begin to say, okay, this is the stage of how do you take research and development and begin productization. And then when you start working with someone like me, then you're talking about productization and scaling, right? So it's a different part of the ecosystem. Typically, when you see, engineers coming out of the real world, they may or may not have hard science behind it, but they're more practical. So they kind of know what they need to build and how to do it. And then they would be the kind of company that I would see, again, 1 or 2 years into it. They have some sort of prototype. There's something I can show that something's been built and put it in front of a customer like Stanley. Typically, Stanley wouldn't buy directly from these small startups because they're not large enough yet. They would buy from a Tulip, obviously, when they're further along, and Tulip has venture funding, but they don't start early. So it's really important to understand that the entry point into someplace like Stanley through an accelerator is because Stanley's looking to Techstars to help the operational part of the business, help on sales, on marketing, building out the team, making sure they have access to capital, just being able to even articulate what they're building and why, and making sure that they're getting the right features in the right time. And so that's what accelerators do. And there's a lot of them. They're great. They're all over the hub, that Sol is involved with. Some of them have accelerators associated with them worldwide in different markets. There's a lot of choices. And I would just say, do your homework and find them. If you're dealing with the automobile industry, there's Automation Alley, which is a terrific resource online in Michigan. And they've been doing all sorts of really innovative things as well as startups. So do some research and figure out where you fit there. And again, the last thing I would leave you with is that each accelerator has their own philosophy. And the philosophy, and one of the reasons I led with, advice, was because the fundamental core premise for Techstars is mentorship. And we throw 80 to 100 mentors at every single company in the first 3 weeks when we talk to them. And so their heads are spinning, right? And they often get conflicting advice and everything. But what they're getting is expertise across the board, business, startup, functional expertise like IP, all the way into, hey, I'm the person who's a domain expert in robotics at Stanley, and I've really loved your robot. Let's talk more about how to make it better, right? So it's just an opportunity, I think, to think about the startup community as different levels. And I think, Tulip, you guys probably started with venture early on. So I don't think you went through an accelerator. I don't know if it's worthwhile you talking about that, but that's a different path as well, and quite, effective, obviously.
Yeah, it's a similar. So for Tulip, the story is out of a university. We're started up out of the MIT Media Lab. We didn't do an accelerator, but very much the out of university story. And I agree with the research you mentioned. The Techstar events are incredible, and the speaker series Lila's putting together is really top notch. So I would encourage everyone to check that out. And everything Adam said as well, we've leveraged MEP, the Mass MEP, but the MEP is all over the US, and they're a great resource, I think, for both manufacturers and also startups in the space, because they get it, and part of their mandate is to bring innovation to American manufacturing. So I would really encourage everyone to check them out. If you're in the Boston area, there's also the Boston Manufacturing Meetup. It's a large group of people. We host that, and we do events. Well, before COVID, we would do them in person. Now we've been doing them virtually. But it's another forum where you can meet people. And the Advanced Manufacturing Hub that I mentioned before, that we run with Stanley Black & Decker, we're trying to bring this to the New England scale. And the idea there is, if you're interested in getting involved, reach out. It's an open forum, really. We have different working groups. So if your startup is in additive, you can either join or start one of the working groups that is doing additive. And if you, and the same with other technologies or other challenges you're interested in. But it's getting out there, meeting other people in the industry is super helpful, and it will help you understand more your customer if you're selling to manufacturing, or it will help you understand your supplier if you're just making a physical product. And it will help you kind of get to know all the other stakeholders in the space, which includes government, academia, and so on.
Right. Okay. So Adam, I'll kind of put this one out to you as well. Looking at some of this idea of the communities and the networking opportunities for people to work with. Can you tell us about some of the things that you see from Forge and some of the places that you work with to create those networks?
Sure. And I think, for us, because we are hardware focused, a lot of what we have for networking opportunities do live in that kind of manufacturing space.
Mm-hmm.
We have 420 suppliers in our network, and we have partners like NIST and the MEPs. So with that, we work closely with places like Techstars, like Bolt, Mass Robotics, Mass Challenge, and the startups are coming to us from some of these organizations at all different stages. And it's really to Lila's point, it's focused in mentorship, but we're unique in that we're not an incubator, we're not an accelerator, we're a connector. And so we're connecting to those kind of that supplier side mentoring,
Mm-hmm.
Which ultimately is a good opportunity for economic development for our region as well, because that mentorship often turns into a partnership or a collaboration. So that's really what we're seeing, is identifying those manufacturers, those design firms that want to partner as a mentor early stage, and then hopefully develop something out of that.
Right. Excellent. So next thing we kind of wanted to look at was, one thing obviously that's important for any company, but any startup is how do we fund things? How do we find some capital? And there's some traditional methods, but just wanted to kind of have each of you comment on some of the avenues that you see people choosing for funding that might be slightly different from sort of a typical path. So Adam, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, sure. For early stage tech startups, especially those that are heavy in R&D, pre-revenue, there's a lot of government funding opportunities,
Mm-hmm.
and they exist at both the state and the federal level. We're more familiar with the Massachusetts landscape, but there's a number of federal agencies like the Department of Energy, Department of Transportation, Department of Defense, SBIR grants that are available for startups. And we'd be happy to connect anyone that was interested with that with more resources to explore some of those opportunities as well.
How about Lila? What are you seeing out there?
So I would reinforce what was just said by Adam. I think the SBIR programming and some of the other things are really helpful. If you go back to where I kind of the URL I put in, which is the blog site, there's actually a video done with Stacy over at the University of Lowell. She is in charge of the SBIR Center of Excellence there, and she talks through really the nitty gritty on how to do an SBIR application, how to think about it, how to find one. So definitely look for that video because that's actually really good for someone who's beginning to think about doing that. I think that that's the single best starting point. You know, remember we talked about getting to a prototype or some proof of concept. Very often that initial money is the hardest to find. And again, government funding, grants, many of the states who are interested particularly in terms of generating a lot of entrepreneurship will give grants. Here in the state of Connecticut, you can definitely have some grants coming in through some of the organizations here as well. So I think we should probably at some point put a list together and publish it to the attendees of this conference, but there's definitely grant availability here for hardware startups. And I'm just don't have it to my hands right now, so I can't do it, but I'll definitely try to dig it out and pass it along. I think that when you get to the point where you have a proof of concept, then very often people do friends and family. They ask their mom or dad, hey, could you just give me a little bit of money so I can buy the components and really put this together and test it out? Again, going out to the marketplace and testing it. That then often gets into angel funding. There's a number of angel groups here in Hartford as well as in the Western Mass area that are doing really interesting work and are more than happy to look at hardware. And that kind of gets you to the point where hopefully you can begin to have some customer traction. Once you have some customer traction, I always encourage people to just see the customer will pay for it, right? That's the first thing you should ask. It's non-dilutive. Can you pay for what I'm going to build you? And can we work together collaboratively? And then obviously the other sources are venture capital and kind of more traditional investors. But I think that the hardest part is that initial prototype and then getting it to the point where you then are ready to go to the high volumes, because there's a lot of risk there. And those are hard. What I have been seeing is a really interesting emergence in funding from what I'd say is corporations, particularly industrials, and it takes multiple forms. So it's not easy to sort of find. Many of them are reaching into and funding seed stage investment vehicles where they are looking actively through kind of a more formal advisor to actually see these kind of early stage deals. I see them in the Midwest. I see them down where you see a lot of there's a belt, you know, halfway through in America, starting from Michigan and going south. You see a lot of those kinds of new funds emerging where the limiteds are not necessarily putting a lot of money in, but they're companies that are interested in manufacturing. And so those are great places to start because the investors in those seed stage ones are doing deals at 500,000 to $1 million. They are specifically looking for, you know, things that they can show their limiteds as innovative new technologies in hardware and industrial. You have in the state of Connecticut, the Connecticut-based funding, which, you know, again, they will add to that kind of investment and they give you that, you know, maybe 500,000 to $1 million, right? Or, you know, 500,000 to 750,000, which will get you that initial one as well. And then what I see is a lot of the corporate venture arms, and this is Stanley including, is working with accelerators and working with other incubation kind of mechanisms. And then they will do follow-on rounds. Like 40% of the companies that came through the accelerator the last 2 years with Stanley Black & Decker, Stanley Ventures put in money. So the corporate world, which has traditionally been later, wait until everything's de-risked, recognizes the value of seed stage innovation. And so they're kind of flirting at the edges. They're not always easy to find, but those are places to think about as well.
Right. And Saul, how about you? What avenues have you used or have you seen that might be kind of outside the typical?
I mean, I think most of it was covered. Definitely, there's a lot of government resources to get started and grants, depending on what you're working on. I've seen that Tulip is venture backed, so we went, you know, the traditional venture backed route. But I will say that, you know, if you ask our CEO and if you ask me, I think I agree. The best source of financing is what Leila said is, you know, your customers. So I would try to, you know, get that initial check as early as possible because it will really help you see if you have something of value, and it will help you, you know, get farther along without diluting yourself. And I think bootstrap is still like the best way for entrepreneurs to fund their businesses.
Right, right.
And I'm going to actually follow up on that because this is an important point that many, many entrepreneurs get wrong. The notion that when you go out and talk to your customers and they tell you, yeah, this is great, it adds a lot of value, doesn't mean they'll pay for it. There's a lot of instances that I've seen companies fail where the entrepreneur did a great job going out and talking to the marketplace. Everyone said, yes, I really want this. And they built it. And then nobody paid for it. And so the notion of just not just bootstrapping, but to Saul's point, when somebody writes a check, they're getting value. It is incredibly affirming of everything you're thinking about, right? So a follow-up question that every single entrepreneur should ask when they go and sort of engage in the market, see if what they're building is interesting, is say, well, now how much would you pay for that? Right? And how much would you pay for that? And by the way, I'm going to build it now and I'm going to come back to you. Will you buy it? And, you know, it's really interesting how that very helpful person, who by the way is helpful and may still be helpful because they may not buy it, but someone else may. So don't don't take this as a sign of don't go forward. But just be cognizant that, you know, people like to please in general. They like to support entrepreneurs. They're going to say positive things, and the proof is in the money. So when they write that check, it's huge. It's really huge.
It is. And you know, it shows that you've got that connection. It shows that, you know, they have that real intent behind it to move forward with something. So,
yeah.
Good. So one last question I wanted to put out before we kind of open up to general Q&A. Kind of looking at, you know, what's going on out in the market for lowering the barrier. So, you know, kind of that entry barrier for these small companies to get into different tools and different technologies. What are some things that you're seeing out there? And I'll start with you, Saul, because I know, you know, kind of building off of what Tulip does, you know, what are you seeing out there in terms of how different manufacturers of the technologies, how different suppliers are making that entry barrier into the newer advanced technologies a little lower to allow people to get in?
Sure, I'm happy to talk about, I guess, what we're doing at Tulip to lower that barrier. For us, the small and medium manufacturers are very important. If you look at manufacturing, there's a long tail. You know, most manufacturers are actually SMBs. So for us, from the beginning, we've been trying to democratize these digital tools and new technologies, and we've taken a couple of approaches. So first, we try to make our product 100% self-serve, so you don't have to pay, you know, integrators or expensive consultants to evaluate it and deploy it and integrate it. So for us, it's really about making the product friendly for the SMBs so they can use it on their own. We lower the barriers to entry by de-risking that initial try. So we have a free trial, which is quite uncommon still in the industry. After we launch it, we start seeing some people also adopting it. So we think that's great because it changes the mind shift of people, you know, that instead of having to talk to a salesperson for 10 months before they even show you a quote, you can try it without talking to anyone. We think that's great. So we do that. We also launched, similar to the free trial, we launched something called the Factory Kit, which is kind of Tulip in a box. So it's a box that comes with a range of sensors and a subscription to Tulip, and you can get started playing with digital manufacturing for a very low cost. And it brings resources as well, so you can try it out. So like all of these things make it easier for you to try before you have to spend any money. And then we've done other things like Tulip University. So it's a number of free resources online for people to learn digital manufacturing concepts. Some of them are related to Tulip, but some of them aren't. They're more general education. So we have a lot of content around that. With MFG Works, we're also helping other companies make their learning resources available for free online. And a couple other things within Tulip, we have what we call the app library. So it's a number of apps that we are making available kind of open source for people to, for our users to adopt, so they don't have to build them on their own. They can use them out of the box. They can easily customize them, but it makes it much easier to get started with digital, because especially with SMBs, you know, we see that the, you know, if the company it's easier for a company to adopt a new technology if they have a problem in mind. So we really try to make that very explicit and very clear on what challenges different apps that they can build with Tulip solve. So if you have a quality issue, you know, we have a number of use cases where you can come in and see which one would apply to your company. So we make that very easy within the product with the content that we make. And then, you know, we also, as I mentioned, that we're helping bridge that gap with the Advanced Manufacturing Hub. So we have a large number of manufacturers there. We have a large number of suppliers. We try to make it explicit what the use cases are. We try to encourage, users of the technology to share what they're seeing. So we see there's a lot of value in that. So through MFG Works, through the Tulip online community, people share the type of gains they see with different technologies, and that encourages other manufacturers to kind of speed up their search for new tech.
Excellent. Adam, how about you, especially as you're dealing with people who are getting into hardware solutions and reaching out to that supplier network? How are you seeing some of these suppliers make technology more accessible?
Sure. So, I mean, there's two sides to it, right? We have the supplier side, we have the innovator side. From the supplier side, we're talking about de-risking. A lot of the smaller, medium-sized manufacturers can see hardware startups as risky. So what we're doing is we are essentially de-risking the connections that we're making. We meet with our suppliers to find out at what level do you want to engage with innovators? What are you comfortable? What are your MOQs? Are you okay with napkin sketch, or do you need DFM, design files ready to go? And so we de-risk those connections by figuring that out on the supplier side. And then with the startups, we're only making connections to suppliers that are ready to engage at their level. Right. And then, from the startup side or the innovator side, we're working again with places like Mass MEP. Recently, we did a series of workshops all around design for manufacturing or lean processes, and we offer those for free to our entire startup network, and that really helps them understand those concepts and helps bring their products to market a bit quicker. So we're seeing it on both sides and trying to help what each side needs in order to de-risk some of these connections.
Right.
I think I would jump in here as well. I mean, you may not want to ask me, Eric, because you think I'm an investor, but I actually see some very interesting trends in this space. And they vary between small companies and large companies, kind of to Adam's point. But what we're seeing is on some levels, you have kind of the beginnings of these marketplaces, B2B markets, where you can buy, basically materials and goods in a way that is really ramping up largely because of COVID, right? So there were these big, large, global supply chains that got disrupted with the COVID crisis. There's a move by large companies to push that towards localized supply chains, which also aligns with this, environmental direction where you see, circular economies, buy, build, sell locally. So that's kind of macro trend on over laying everything. And then when you drive deeper into it, to both the points that Saul and Anna were saying, there's an underlying implication of complexity. This is the whole issue we've talked about throughout this whole panel. And so what I'm also seeing is an emergence of a number of these sort of platforms, which are not just about, hey, where are my choices of suppliers, but trying to then create a sense of collaboration on that platform. So you have different expertise, which normally is now residing in the head of somebody's brain. Adam's saying, well, this supplier is not ready for this, startup. This startup's not really ready for that supplier. That's generally in people's heads today. But over time, I see that a lot of these platform plays are less about a marketplace where you're bidding against someone else for a better price, and more about, we're going to get better price because we're going to collaborate and reduce risk on both sides, the risk of the buyer and the risk of the seller. And the risk of the buyer is, am I going to get on time? What's my yield? Is it going to actually break when I put it into the marketplace? All those, what's my second source? All the considerations of everything we just talked about. But on the supply chain side, they also have risk because, if something goes wrong, if the specifications of what they're trying to build aren't as easy to do, to Adam's earlier point about, are they too tight tolerances and things like that. If there's an ability for both supplier and buyer to talk technically about, do you really need that particular spec to be that tight? Or can we loosen it here? And then my yield will go up, and then my probability of being able to supply you what you need on a timely fashion goes up, and my risk goes down. So over time, what I'm seeing here, it's really interesting, is this set of platforms where people are beginning to think about quality and yield as a collaborative engagement between a supplier and a buyer. And then on top of that, there's the optimization guys doing all their algorithms about, well, if we buy here and here, and so the world of the supply chain is going electronic in some extremely interesting ways.
Right. Yeah, I look back at I worked for a contract manufacturer at one point in my career, and we had one buyer who was famous for just, he would essentially hold these auctions where it was, hey, I need the best price possible. And he would pit people back and forth against each other. And I, in talking to one of the suppliers one day, I said, I hear him doing this, and I got to imagine this is painful for you guys as suppliers. And they said, oh, we hate him. We hate working with him. We just, and so this idea of the partnership and that collaboration between, with the supplier, they need to be a part of your team, and you need to have that trust in there. Absolutely.
And it has long-term implications. I mean, I was just talking to somebody about, we're in Boston, and the Boston, metro system. Every line has a different set of cars. And why does every line have a different set of cars, which, by the way, cannot switch between the different lines?
Right.
Because each one was a low-cost bid. There's no holistic thought of system. Gee, wouldn't it be nice if the red line could swap with the green line, and we'll just change the lighting on it, and because we have more cars here and less cars here. I mean, so you have this kludge of things that don't really work well together because you're driven so individually on one metric, right?
Right.
In the spirit of Lila's notes on COVID and onshoring, I think it's also important that we kind of beat the drum for local manufacturing as well. There's a lot of positives that come along with that. There's a lot of misconceptions as well. And while it doesn't always make sense to manufacture local, there are just so many benefits that come along with that. And one of those is that collaborative relationship. You can go see your product come off the line, make sure it's right. You stay away from hidden shipping costs. IP is protected a lot better. And so really just getting that word out there as well, I think it's important.
Yeah.
And environmentally,
environmental, exactly.
We're not sending big container ships, which are not great for those things. So
so we have a couple questions coming in now. We'll kind of move into some Q&A. So the first question came in, on the topic of mentors. What are some strategies for finding kind of a right fit mentor?
So it's so interesting. And I don't think there's an answer to that. I think there's lots of answers to that. So I've talked ad nauseam with my peers at Techstars. I've thought a lot about how do I optimize my mentor madness of 80 mentors. And the conclusion that I have, and that the folks who've done the Techstars accelerators many times around, is that you can't overthink it, because very often you get in the room and there's chemistry. And we all know, you go to a cocktail conversation, you're going to end up talking to the person you find interesting, and they may not be the one that your spouse finds interesting or someone else finds interesting. And once there is this kind of connection, that's where really beautiful things happen. Somebody gets excited about your product, somebody gets excited about you, working with you, and that may not be the ideal mentor in terms of industry domain expertise, but they just end up knowing people because they think about you, right? They go to bed thinking, well, I really wish Saul meets this person, right? Or David, whatever. And it's really valuable for there to be chemistry. So I wouldn't underestimate that as just something to keep in mind. I think people mentor for a lot of different reasons. I mentor, and I've always mentored because as an entrepreneur, somebody helped me and mentored me. And so you just kind of give back mindset, which I think is extremely important. You want to avoid mentors that say, oh, by the way, I want 1% of your company for mentoring you. I mean, eventually you may want to offer that because they become an advisor and they're spending so much time with you. But if they lead with you, it's the wrong mindset. Right. And so mentorship should be about giving first. And then I would also add that sometimes you have mentors who just mentor you because they really want to keep track of what's happening in the marketplace. And that's totally fine, particularly domain expertise. And there may not be the chemistry, and there may not be the give first mindset, but it's a business relationship. And so you should view that mentorship as a business relationship. I would also say that the last point I would make is that mentors come in different flavors and different experiences. And I look at expertise in terms of industry, and I also look at expertise in terms of startups, sort of functional expertise. If you are someone who came up through sales, you're not going to know how to hire a top tier engineer. If you're an engineer, I don't care how smart you are, you don't know how to hire a top tier salesperson unless you've done it before, right? The first time you hire for an expertise you've never ever managed before, or you've done the job itself, your odds of getting an A+ player are pretty low. And so when you think about your advisors, think about who can advise you with it. So if you think about college experience, let's say you're 24 and starting your own company, right? Then maybe the guy who studied marketing is the guy who's going to help you get your marketing person. The guy who studied engineering is going to help you get your engineering person. And that's your network of your age group, your cohort. But then you want to tap into the network of people who are 10 or 15 years ahead of you. And so it's really important to sort of be lucid about what do you know and what do you not know, and how do you actually find that expertise through mentorship. And that's why some of these, accelerators are so powerful, because everyone in that accelerator typically, like in Techstars, if you're running an accelerator, you started a company somewhere in your career, right? You did this already. And so that expertise makes them very good at getting certainly that kind of the mentors that are doing entrepreneurship. And then after that, if you've got a vertical specific like mine, then, my mentors come from people who are much smarter than I am at Stanley about engineering. So I tap and rely heavily on them.
Right.
Yeah. To Lila's point, I really think one of the things I tell my startups oftentimes is to consider an advisory council made up of people that can handle those weaker parts of your organization. Like Lila said, you could be very strong in engineering, but know nothing about marketing. You know anybody in your group of people that can do marketing, invite them onto an advisory council. You'd be surprised how many people want to take that on. And the way you find these people is by getting out there, networking, taking advantage of any opportunities such as this event here, to meet people. And from what I seem to find, it's not the rule, but a lot of times I see that mentors find you. Rather than the other way around. A lot of events that we'll have, we notice that some of the suppliers that are on a panel or in the crowd end up meeting one of our startups, and then the next thing you know, they're taking them under their wing. It works out well. When we connect a startup to our supply chain, we often connect them to 3 to 4 different options. And the feedback that I get oftentimes is they chose somebody not because they're the best price, but because, like Lila said, there was that chemistry there.
Right.
And it really proves to be a nice relationship.
So this actually kind of leads us into another question that came in. It's a great segue. So, and I'll ask Saul to kind of chime in on this one. As you're going out there talking to people, whether it's mentors or suppliers or just the network in general, you're sharing this idea, you're sharing, some of your thoughts on it. How do you make sure that you protect that? So as you're out there talking about it, there's obviously that risk that, it could get out into the market without you.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I hear it so often that I think it's a myth that you should keep the idea for yourself, because the idea is worth a lot. But most often than not, it's not really the idea, it's the execution, right? So the best thing you could do if you have an idea as an entrepreneur is to share it, because you'll get feedback. And the most valuable thing you need at the beginning and throughout, honestly, is the feedback. So yes, there is always a risk that somebody might take the idea, but you know, as I said, like the idea is not the hard part. The hard part is like actually executing and so on. Of course, you should, you know, be smart about it. If you actually have new IP, then you know there's some things you should do, but there's ways to protect around that. And you know, more often than not, like just knowing about the idea won't let anyone you know, take it from you. And if they did, then you know they beat you in the execution, which is where you need to focus really as an entrepreneur. So I always encourage people to share the ideas early. The benefit you get from that feedback is just so much higher than the potential risk. So I can't stress that enough.
And I would say that no one is going to execute with a greater degree of drive than someone whose original idea it is. I don't care, you know, people just, the early stage is passion. So much of it is just sheer passion. And so don't underestimate that value.
Right. All right. Well, we're winding down here with just a couple more minutes. So were there any final thoughts that anybody wanted to share, you know, before we kind of wrap up?
I think what I would say is that there was a question I saw kind of pass through about, hey, I have these technologies I can work with, and I'd like to have some help figuring out what to build. I hear that a lot. I have people coming to me, particularly in this age of machine learning and AI. Hey, I have this algorithm and it can do all these amazing things. Tell me what you need. And that's one of the reasons also the speaker series that I put out is, you know, about, you know, pushing out the needs of these large companies. I would say solve a problem, right? Go back to what all the other panelists are saying and find someone who can tell you this is a pain point. I will pay to have this problem solved. And if they pay you to solve that problem for you before you have to get to raise money, I mean, it's just a natural way to actually refine and get your product better because you're actually grappling with a specific statement. So it's very hard to just start and say conceptually, I have these technologies, what am I going to do with them? I think you need to just talk to people and figure out what the problem points are.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's you know, that's definitely important, and that's something that you know, especially as we look at the advanced technologies that are out there. You know, I kind of shock people sometimes when I'm talking to them because I say I'm not about technology for the sake of technology. It's got to fill a need. It's got to take care of something for somebody and be tied to a business impact. So, all right. Well, thank you, everybody. We appreciate our panelists today. Saul, Adam, and Lila, thank you for your participation. You know, again, to everybody watching, you know, we've had some links out there for some good resources. So definitely take a look at those and you know, leverage that expertise. And we thank you for watching. And I'll turn it back over to Jeff.
Yep, thank you. I just want to echo Eric's thanks, and we appreciate you sharing your background and knowledge, and ask everyone to participate in Startup Week Hartford and look for the other events in the advanced manufacturing track. So thank you very much, and we'll say goodbye.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Goodbye.
Thank you.